Your credentials are invalid. We don't seat unverified individuals in first class." That's what Captain Margaret Vaughn said, loud enough for every passenger to hear, clear enough to cut through leather, glass, and silence. Julian Harris didn't move, not right away. The private Gulfstream G700 cabin was still boarding. He had just stepped inside. No entourage, no briefcase, just a phone in one hand and his scarf draped neatly over his other arm. Margaret didn't blink as she stared him down. Behind her, Frederick Wells, a well-known white venture capitalist already seated in 2A, stood, snatched the boarding slip from Julian's hand, and ripped it in half without a hint of hesitation. "He's not listed," Frederick declared. "This isn't his seat. He's trying to sneak in." No one around them said a word. Not yet. But every pair of eyes on that aircraft followed Julian now. Some with curiosity, others with disdain. And not one of them knew that within 10 minutes, this man, this calm, composed black man dressed in nothing more than a linen shirt and trousers, would own every soul in that cabin, because he owned the jet. He owned the company. And before this jet ever left the ground, he would fire its captain, dismiss its crew, and launch a movement that would echo across the skies. Before we dive into what happened next, I want to know, where are you watching from today? Share your city or country in the comments below. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this story if it moves you. We're about to witness something extraordinary. How one man's calm refusal to be humiliated became the spark that forced an entire industry to look in the mirror. It was 8:45 a.m. on a Saturday morning. The light filtering through the Gulfstream's windows landed softly on cream leather seats and polished ebony trim. Julian Harris, age 48, billionaire founder and CEO of Pinnacle Ventures, had boarded the flight not as himself, but as a silent observer. He had done this before. Undercover assessments. No one on board had been told he would be flying today. Not the passengers, not the crew, not even the captain. That was the point. This wasn't a pleasure trip. It was an integrity test. A measure of how Pinnacle Air Lux, the very company he owned, treated those who didn't walk in looking like they belonged. Captain Margaret Vaughn had a history. Before Pinnacle Ventures acquired her boutique charter firm in 2023, she had been its prideful founder. The merger had kept her job but wounded her ego. She never truly accepted that she now reported to a black man, especially one younger, wealthier, and more respected than she had ever been. So when Julian boarded unannounced, without fanfare or formal uniform, she saw what she wanted to see, someone beneath her. Someone she could remove without consequence. Julian had barely crossed the entryway when Margaret stopped him. Her tone was measured, but the venom beneath it couldn't be missed. "You're not listed," she said, eyeing the boarding slip. Julian extended it. "Please confirm." She didn't take it. Frederick Wells took it instead. "We don't let people walk in and pick seats," he said, waving the paper before tossing it onto the aisle floor like trash. "This is first class, real first class." Julian knelt to pick it up, slow and careful, his expression unreadable. But his silence spoke louder than any outburst ever could. It was the silence of a man who had seen this before, lived through this before, and prepared his whole life for what would come next. Miles Turner, a 28-year-old data analyst seated in 3A, pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the record button. Behind him, Grace Patel, a seasoned human rights lawyer, reached forward and gently placed her hand over his wrist. "Not yet," she whispered. "Let him speak first. Let the truth speak first." Miles hesitated. Julian gave him a brief nod, acknowledging the impulse, but asking for restraint. A few rows over, Caleb Grant, a young reporter who had written extensively about racial discrimination in luxury industries. Took out a pen. His hand shook, just slightly. He didn't need video. He would write it, all of it. Captain Vaughn turned toward the flight attendant. "Chloe," she called, "we've got an unconfirmed passenger trying to occupy seat 2A. Chloe Bennett, young and unsure, nodded. "Not listed on our manifest," she repeated automatically. "That seat belongs to Mr. Wells." Julian looked her in the eye. "I'm asking for a verification, not an opinion." Margaret raised her voice just enough to be heard by every passenger. "This unlisted individual is delaying our departure. Security will be summoned if he doesn't step aside." Frederick smirked and leaned back in his seat, arms crossed. Some people just can't take a hint. Then he pulled out a sleek black leather card from his coat pocket. "Elite status," he said smugly, flashing it like a badge. "You don't just walk in here without it." Julian looked at the card, then looked at Frederick. "I don't need a card," he said. "I need truth." That was when Caleb, watching closely, squinted at the badge in Frederick's hand. "Hold on," he said, rising from his seat. "That's not a valid format. They changed those cards last year." He stepped forward and carefully plucked the card from Frederick's fingers. "This isn't even real," he said, holding it up for others to see. "This man forged his status." The whispering began. Someone gasped. Even Chloe looked stunned. Julian's phone buzzed once. He answered. "Evelyn," he said, calmly. "Record this moment." On the other end, Evelyn Carter, his longtime executive assistant, didn't ask why. "Already recording," she replied, "documenting every word." Julian glanced at Captain Vaughn. "You're challenging the integrity of your employer. You realize that, don't you?" Margaret scoffed. "You're not my employer. You're not even a passenger." Julian looked directly at her. "If you say that again, you'll regret it," Frederick interjected. "This is nonsense. Call security already. He's trespassing." Caleb stepped forward. "He's doing nothing of the sort, and you know it." Grace, still seated, added, "This isn't about procedure. This is about perception." Julian remained composed. "Captain Vaughn, this is your final opportunity to verify my seat quietly, before this becomes something far bigger than you imagine." Margaret didn't move. Julian turned back to his phone. "Evelyn, notify corporate that I've been denied my seat by name. Note the names of the captain, the attendant, and the passenger in seat 2A. Evelyn responded. "Noted. Would you like me to escalate?" Julian replied. "Let's give them one last chance to choose integrity." Caleb folded his arms. "This is vile," he muttered. "All of it." Julian answered him softly. "That's why I came alone." Margaret still didn't speak, but her silence, rigid, defiant, was answer enough. Julian looked down at the torn boarding pass in his hand. Then he looked up at every passenger in the cabin. This company was built to elevate everyone, but it seems we still need to learn who we truly serve. And the cabin, once polished and still, began to shift, not with movement, but with tension, with awakening. Margaret's scorn kindled a cabin awakening. Captain Margaret Vaughn took a deliberate step forward, her boots clicking softly against the hardwood flooring beneath the cream-colored carpet that lined the jet. Her jaw was tight, her voice sharp. "This is no longer a boarding issue. This is an act of deception." She turned toward First Officer Richard Ellis, standing near the cockpit with uncertainty clouding his expression. "Richard," she said, "this passenger's identity is fraudulent. I want him removed from the manifest immediately." Richard hesitated. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at Margaret, then at Chloe, then finally down at his own hands. Julian stood tall, unflinching, his scarf still resting across one arm, eyes fixed not on her face, but just beyond it, like he was already past this moment, already stepping into the reckoning that awaited them all. Margaret's voice rose a half step. "You think you can take over this airline and not face consequences? You gutted everything we built? You're a thief in a pressed shirt." From behind Julian, Frederick Wells added, "A liar. More like, he's clearly not who he says he is." The words rolled off Julian like cold wind off glass. Chloe Bennett, the young flight attendant, stood frozen for a moment, then nodded as if cued. "His name's not on the iPad," she said, holding up the device without turning it toward the passengers. "He's unconfirmed." Her voice was too quick, too rehearsed. Julian noticed. So did Caleb Grant, who narrowed his eyes and took 2 steps forward. "Did you check his ID, Chloe?" he asked. "Or are you just repeating what you were told?" Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "This is our domain, not yours. He belongs in cargo if he wants a ride." A soft gasp spread through the cabin. The woman in 3B turned away in disgust. Grace Patel leaned forward from her seat. "That was uncalled for. Captain." Margaret didn't flinch. "This is first class. We have standards." Julian remained still, but the grief on his face deepened. Not the grief of humiliation, but of knowing that after all these years, after everything he had built, after trying to give people like Margaret and Chloe the benefit of the doubt, he was still just a test to them, a target. Miles Turner's hand shook as he lifted his phone again, starting to film, but Grace was quicker. She reached out and gently pushed it back down. "Not yet. Not like this. Let's speak. Let's stand. But don't reduce this to pixels. This isn't a story. It's a wound." Miles nodded reluctantly and slid the phone back into his jacket. In the silence that followed, Julian raised his phone again and pressed the button. Evelyn's voice came through the speaker, crisp, controlled. "Yes, sir?" Julian didn't raise his voice. "Evelyn, begin recording a statement. Captain Margaret Vaughn has publicly accused me of falsifying my identity, and flight attendant Chloe Bennett has declared me unconfirmed, despite holding a boarding pass issued by corporate," Evelyn replied. "I'm logging every word. Continue when ready." Julian looked directly at Chloe. "Tell the truth. Are you following orders, or are you complicit?" Chloe's hands trembled. Her eyes darted to Margaret. I'm just reporting what I was told," Margaret snapped. "Don't backpedal now." Julian stepped forward. "Captain Vaughn, you've accused me of theft, of fraud, of being unworthy of this space. You're not just wrong, you're dangerous." Richard Ellis shifted uneasily, clearly torn. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Evelyn's voice crackled again. "Sir, I've logged all statements so far. Would you like me to notify internal compliance?" Julian said. "Not yet. Keep listening. There's more." That was when Chloe cracked. Her voice broke mid-sentence. "She bribed me," she said, just above a whisper. "I wasn't supposed to say anything, but she gave me $2,000 last week to remove a name from the iPad manifest. I didn't know it would be you." Gasps erupted again. Grace stood. "You did what?" Chloe nodded, tears forming now. "She said it was a routine adjustment, said the passenger had been flagged for suspicion." Margaret's face turned to stone. "This is absurd," she said. "You think anyone would believe that?" But Chloe was already shaking her head. "I've saved the message. It's on my phone. You told me to do it." Julian let out a slow breath. "That," he said quietly, "is the sound of truth crawling out from under the weight of fear." Margaret spun on Chloe. "You think this will save you?" Julian raised a hand. "Stop. The damage is done. Evelyn's voice returned. We've captured everything. This will go directly to senior corporate leadership. Is it time? Sir? Julian paused, then turned to Richard. You're next. Richard looked up. Startled, Julian asked. Did you change my profile in the system? Was my name flagged? Richard hesitated. His face flushed. I don't know what happened. Margaret said it was a mistake. I just followed the edit request. Caleb stepped in. That's not just procedure. That's tampering. Julian didn't break eye contact. Tell the truth. Mr. Ellis, the moment calls for men, not cowards. Richard looked down. Yes, I flagged it. But I didn't know who it was for. Margaret scoffed. Spineless. Julian said nothing. He didn't have to. The silence was loud enough. Grace turned to the rest of the cabin. Is this who you trust to fly this aircraft? A captain who bribes her staff? A first officer who manipulates records? Frederick muttered. You people are unbelievable. You always make everything about race. Caleb turned. Because it is. And you just proved it. Julian lifted his phone again. Evelyn, log passenger Frederick Wells for forging elite credentials and verbal misconduct. Evelyn answered. Logged and submitted. Julian looked out the window for a moment. The tarmac glistened under the morning sun. A jet engine whirred in the distance. But inside this aircraft, something had shifted. Not just in tone, not just in power, but in truth. The passengers weren't looking at Julian the same way anymore. They weren't looking at him as an intruder. They were looking at him as a man who had been targeted, tested, and who had endured it with more composure than most of them could have managed. You've wounded Pinnacle Air Lux's heart, Julian said, turning back to Margaret. But you haven't broken it, because its soul doesn't live in your cockpit. It lives in every passenger who stands up when it matters most. Richard's face turned pale. Chloe wept silently. Caleb stepped back beside Julian. We're not done, he said, but we're getting closer. And from behind them. Miles's phone buzzed again, just once. He didn't reach for it, not yet, because for the first time in that cabin, words were doing the work. Captain Margaret Vaughn didn't retreat. If anything, she doubled down. You want proof you belong here? She sneered. Show us. Show us where your money comes from, who you really are. Don't just wave your voice around like it carries weight. Prove it. Julian didn't respond right away. Instead, he inhaled deeply, letting the air settle. But the room around him didn't wait. First Officer Richard Ellis, clearly shaken by the earlier confession, suddenly found his courage again, not in truth, but in pressure. We've asked nicely, Richard said, stepping toward Julian. Now we need to restore order. Step off the jet. His voice cracked halfway through, betraying his uncertainty. From behind him, Frederick Wells rose to his feet, waving his forged card again like it meant something. This is madness, Frederick said. Throw him off. He's a criminal. He's trespassing. We all saw it. Julian's gaze didn't move, but his fingers tightened slightly on his phone. At that moment, Chloe Bennett, the young attendant who had earlier confessed to tampering, looked away, guilt flooding her face. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Samuel Holt, the security officer stationed near the cockpit, moved forward. Mr. Harris, he said, deliberately using no title. You've been asked to leave the cabin. I need you to comply. His tone wasn't loud, but it was firm and final. Refusal will result in escalation. He reached forward, gripping Julian's right shoulder. It wasn't gentle. It was a show of control, a statement, a threat in uniform. As his hand landed, Julian didn't flinch, but the cabin did. Grace Patel stood so quickly her seat rocked. "Take your hand off him," she said sharply. "This is no longer protocol. This is harassment." But Samuel didn't let go. Instead, with one arm, he pushed Julian back slightly, just enough for the scarf to fall to the floor. "Sir," he said again, "step off the aircraft." The entire aisle held its breath. Behind them, Caleb Grant raised his voice. "What is the charge?" he demanded. "What law has he broken?" Frederick responded instead. "He doesn't belong here. That's the charge." Grace turned on him. "Belonging isn't a matter of your comfort. Mr. Wells, it's a matter of truth, and your truth's already unraveling." Miles Turner, still seated, reached again for his phone. "I need to film this," he said, his voice tense. Julian turned toward him. "Miles, no, we don't need video. We need voice, speak, witness. Don't disappear behind the lens." Grace stepped closer. "Speak it. Miles, don't hide it." Miles nodded, stood, and said clearly, "This is racial profiling. This is abuse of authority, and it's happening in broad daylight." Evelyn's voice came through the phone once again. "Sir, I've logged physical contact by security. Do I escalate?" Julian's reply was soft. "Not yet." Margaret, arms folded, smiled faintly. "So much drama for one unauthorized guest." Julian turned toward her slowly. "This will be the last time you insult me, Captain." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was steady, grounded. Behind him, Caleb leaned in. "You're not alone, sir." Julian tapped the screen of his phone again. "Evelyn, begin corporate identification protocol." Evelyn replied without hesitation. "Yes, sir. Identity confirmation initiated. Internal review code 37 Alpha." Margaret's smile faded. Chloe looked up in confusion. Even Richard took a half-step back. "What are you doing?" he asked. Julian didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Samuel, still holding his arm. "Remove your hand, or you'll lose your position before this jet ever leaves the ground." Samuel hesitated, but Julian didn't blink. Slowly, reluctantly, the officer let go. Then Julian spoke again. "Margaret, Frederick, Richard, Chloe, you've all violated the most basic tenets of decency. You've allowed bias to replace procedure, pride to replace truth." Margaret laughed bitterly. "You talk like you're someone." Julian nodded. "I am. But even if I weren't, I'd still deserve dignity." Frederick rolled his eyes. "You're nobody. You're a poser with a story," Caleb shouted back. "You're the fraud. Mr. Wells, you're the one with the forged status badge. We all saw it." Julian raised his phone once more. "Evelyn, note that security contact has ceased, but verbal hostility continues," Evelyn responded. "Logged and archived." That's when Richard Ellis broke. His voice cracked as he spoke. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he muttered. "She said it was a test. Just a test." Margaret turned toward him, eyes narrow. "Don't you dare!" But he ignored her. "I altered the manifest." Richard said aloud, "It was me. I removed his name from the list. I didn't know who it was for at first. But when I found out, I said nothing." The cabin went dead quiet. Frederick stepped back. Chloe let out a soft, choked sob. Margaret didn't speak, but her silence was louder than screams. "I was following orders," Richard added. "But that's not an excuse. I failed." Julian looked at him and said quietly, "Thank you for telling the truth, even if it came too late." Evelyn's voice returned, gentler now. "Sir, corporate protocol confirms internal record tampering by First Officer Richard Ellis. We're prepared to authorize administrative override if you wish." Julian's reply was immediate. Not yet. There's one thing left. Then, for the first time in nearly 10 minutes, Julian raised his voice, not in anger, but in declaration. I own Pinnacle Air Lux. The sentence hung in the air like thunder. I am Julian Harris, founder and CEO of Pinnacle Ventures, and every inch of this aircraft, including your contracts, falls under my authority. Gasps, audible gasps. Frederick stepped backward into his seat. Chloe stumbled into the galley. Margaret froze. Richard lowered his head, and the passengers, who had watched in silence, then in concern, and finally in disbelief, rose to their feet. Some clapped, others stood still, but all of them looked at Julian now with awe. Not because he had revealed his power, but because he had never needed to. Grace stepped forward and nodded once. You didn't have to prove it, but you did. And now, it's our turn to stand. Julian looked at her, at Caleb, at Miles, at every face in that cabin. And then he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Let's finish this right. Margaret Vaughn wasn't finished. Her voice, though quieter now, still carried the same venom as before. That's a bold claim, Mr. Harris, but it doesn't excuse your disruption. You've compromised the order of this flight, and I won't allow it to continue. Samuel, escort him off the jet immediately. Her words cut the air like steel, and Samuel Holt, once hesitant, now stepped forward again, encouraged by the captain's tone. His expression was colder this time. Sir, I'm asking you to come with me. Now. He reached toward Julian's shoulder again, but passengers began to stir. A woman in the back row stood, her voice trembling. You're going to remove the owner of this airline from his own aircraft? Caleb stepped between Samuel and Julian. Don't touch him. You do that, and I'll ensure your name is in every outlet by noon. Samuel's hand hovered, unsure now, but Margaret didn't yield. This flight is under my command until departure. He is not qualified to sit here. That's when Nia Thompson spoke, quiet until now, seated beside the window in seat 3A. Her voice broke through the tension. Excuse me, she said carefully, but I'd like to confirm that my boarding pass is also being questioned. Margaret's head snapped toward her. Excuse me? Nia, a black textile designer traveling to a design showcase in London, held out her pass. You passed me in the aisle earlier and said nothing. Now that we're identifying who belongs and who doesn't, am I also in the wrong seat? Margaret hesitated, then moved toward her. Your documents were suspect when I reviewed the manifest. We'll need to verify your status too. Nia's lips parted in disbelief. Are you serious? Margaret nodded, turning to Chloe. Check her clearance. Chloe, still visibly shaken, froze in place. Julian looked across the cabin at Nia, saw the panic rising in her throat. Don't move, he said gently. You belong here. Miles Turner stood now, fists clenched. How many more people are you going to target today? Grace Patel stepped toward Nia protectively. This is retaliation, plain and simple. Margaret pointed toward Julian. This is the chaos you've caused. Julian didn't flinch. No, Captain, this is the truth you tried to bury. Samuel raised his voice again. Sir, I will have to use force if you do not comply. At that moment, Richard Ellis whispered something barely audible. Check her logbook. Caleb, ears sharp, turned. What did you say? Her logbook, Richard repeated, louder this time. Margaret keeps a private flight log, always has. Notes on every passenger. She writes things that aren't supposed to be shared. Chloe's mouth dropped open. You mean the one with the initials and color codes? Yes, Richard said, his voice growing steadier. It's all there. She documents who she believes is worthy and who isn't. I saw her write in it before takeoff. Julian turned to Chloe. Where is it? Chloe hesitated, then stepped toward the cockpit storage compartment. She pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, tucked inside a maintenance binder. She opened it, flipping past technical notes until she found a tabbed section with handwritten entries. Caleb took it from her hands and began reading aloud. May 25, unverified woman in 3A, likely designer type, watch for fabricated credentials. He paused, looking at Nia, who stood frozen, hands at her sides. May 31, man in linen shirt, possible plant. If challenged, escalate gently. Don't engage on race. The cabin fell into stunned silence. Margaret's face turned a pale shade of ash. Those are private notes. They're not policy. Caleb didn't stop. February 14th, passenger Grant, too outspoken, track seating movement. He looked at Julian. This is a pattern, a manifesto of quiet discrimination. Nia stepped forward. So it was never about documents. It was about who made you uncomfortable. Margaret's voice cracked, but she tried again. That notebook isn't sanctioned. Julian turned to Samuel. Are you still prepared to remove me? Or are you going to read the words your captain wrote about you too? Samuel stiffened. She has notes about everyone? Chloe nodded solemnly. She kept lists, names, comments about tone, dress, even skin tone. Evelyn's voice came through Julian's phone once more. Sir, we've received the logbook image from Caleb's stream. Internal legal is reviewing. Would you like to proceed with corrective action? Julian didn't answer yet. He stepped closer to Margaret. You hid behind ranks, behind uniforms. But it wasn't order you were protecting. It was bias. Margaret's posture faltered. You don't understand what it's like to manage pressure. Julian shook his head slowly. I understand exactly what pressure feels like, but I don't use it to dehumanize people, Chloe whispered. There's more. Julian looked at her. Show them. Chloe turned the final pages. Inside was a list of names under the title, Preferred Guests. All were white. Several were underlined, including Frederick Wells. Caleb read out the last entry. June projection. Remove outliers. Shift equity appearances to PR only. Miles spoke what everyone was thinking. That's not ignorance. That's engineering discrimination. Julian turned to Evelyn. Begin protocol escalation, Evelyn responded. Corporate now authorizes full executive override. You may proceed. Julian looked around the cabin, at every face watching him, at Nia, still shaking, at Chloe, crying, at Margaret, now slumped in the galley. You've written enough. Captain, but this final page, you don't get to control how it ends. He stepped forward. You're relieved of duty. As of now. Caleb nodded. And we'll make sure that logbook finds its way into the daylight. The cabin, once trembling with tension, began to breathe again. But what came next would define not just this flight, but the future of Pinnacle Air Lux itself. Julian stood still for a moment, eyes lowered, as the weight of silence pressed down on the cabin like gravity. Then, with a calm breath, he reached for the button on his jacket and fastened it with quiet dignity. He stepped forward, eyes meeting every member of the flight crew with unwavering clarity. Captain Margaret Vaughn, he said, voice clear but composed. You no longer hold authority on this aircraft. As of this moment, you are dismissed from your role and relieved of all responsibilities. Margaret's mouth parted in disbelief. You can't. But Julian raised one hand. I can. And I have. He turned next to Richard. Mr. Ellis, as first officer, your falsification of internal records violates both trust and operational integrity. You are hereby dismissed. Then to Chloe, who looked away in shame. Ms. Bennett, I acknowledge your confession, but complicity is still participation. You are dismissed as well. Chloe swallowed, nodding without protest. Finally, Julian's eyes settled on Samuel. Mr. Holt, you physically mishandled a passenger in violation of protocol and failed to question an unlawful directive. You are no longer part of this crew. The four stood frozen in place, stunned, hollow. Julian turned toward the passengers, his voice now addressing all. This aircraft and the company behind it were built on a promise, not just of luxury, but of dignity. That promise was violated here today. He turned slightly, facing the central aisle. I am Julian Harris, founder and CEO of Pinnacle Ventures, owner of Pinnacle Air Lux. This aircraft, this crew, this route, all of it is under my direction. The ripple through the cabin was instant. Audible gasps, murmured exclamations, hands rose to mouths. Caleb took a step back, then forward again, stunned. You own this entire operation? Julian nodded once. Every flight, every hangar, every employee, and starting today, every standard will be rewritten. Evelyn's voice came through the phone. All dismissals acknowledged and confirmed. You are fully empowered to proceed. Sir? Julian exhaled and stepped closer to the galley. And we will proceed, not with vengeance, but with reform. He turned, speaking directly to the stunned group of passengers. Effective immediately. I'm establishing the Pinnacle Sky Trust, a $15 million initiative that will fund equity in aviation through scholarships, pilot development, and crew diversity training across the private charter industry. Applause broke out, first from Miles, then Nia, then Caleb, then others. Grace wiped her eyes. That's real change, she said, under her breath. That's leadership. Frederick Wells, still seated near the front, rose with a smirk. You think this makes you noble? You just embarrassed your own staff in front of strangers. That's not leadership. It's theater. Julian didn't even look at him. Mr. Wells, he said evenly, you forged your credentials, verbally harassed multiple passengers, and encouraged the removal of the airline's CEO from his own cabin. As of this moment, you are permanently banned from all Pinnacle Air Lux flights. Frederick turned red. You don't have the authority. Evelyn's voice cut in. It's already logged. His access has been revoked system-wide. Frederick took a step toward the aisle, but the passengers flanking him didn't budge. They didn't make way. They stared, and they remembered. Julian walked past him without another glance. That was when Chloe spoke again, voice trembling. There's something else, she said. Something I never told anyone. Julian turned slowly. Speak. Chloe hesitated, then pulled out her personal tablet from the rear galley drawer. Before today, I was asked to delete several internal complaints about bias, not just from this flight, from others, but I couldn't do it. I archived them instead, stored them in a folder labeled Routine Logs. It's all there. Dates, names, statements. Julian approached her. Are you saying there's a hidden file of complaints from previous flights? She nodded. Dozens, maybe more. Most never reached compliance. Caleb stepped forward. That's a cover-up, a deliberate one. Chloe extended the tablet to Julian. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't think anyone would believe me. Evelyn's voice returned, quiet this time. We're receiving a copy now. Confirmed. These entries were never submitted. The system shows no matching files in the database. Julian held the tablet like it was made of glass. And why keep them? Chloe answered, barely above a whisper. Because part of me hoped that someday someone would come looking. Julian stared at her for a long second. Today is that day. He turned to the passengers. This archive is no longer hidden, And this pattern is no longer tolerated. The energy in the cabin shifted again. From disbelief to relief, Miles spoke, his voice full of awe. We watched this whole thing start with a torn boarding pass, and now you're rebuilding the system. Julian looked out across the cabin, taking in the faces, the stunned, the inspired, the quietly furious, and the openly tearful. This isn't just about a seat, he said. It's about who we choose to protect, and who we leave unspoken. That changes now. Grace stepped forward. You've rewritten the ending, Mr. Harris, but more importantly, you gave it back to the people who lived it. Nia, tears in her eyes, nodded. Thank you for seeing me. Evelyn returned one last time. Corporate leadership has endorsed your actions. Internal legal will initiate investigations, and the Pinnacle Sky Trust press release will go live in 60 seconds. Julian nodded once, then slowly, with quiet assurance. He walked back to his seat, not to reclaim it, but to recenter it. This aircraft would fly again, but it would never fly the same. The cabin was quiet now, not with tension, but with transformation. Julian remained standing near the aisle, centered between the rows of people who had just witnessed both disgrace and renewal. He looked toward the cockpit door, then slowly scanned the faces of those still seated. His voice, when it came, was not raised. It didn't need to be. This aircraft was never just about leather seats or champagne, he said softly. It was always meant to be a vessel for dignity. He turned slightly, his gaze steady. And starting today, Pinnacle Air Lux will no longer tolerate unspoken bias behind closed cockpit doors. A murmur of agreement rippled through the passengers. Then, with quiet authority, Julian continued. We are launching the Pinnacle Unity Campaign, a permanent, internal initiative across all branches of Pinnacle Air Lux, mandating empathy training, quarterly verbal audit panels, anonymous passenger grievance reviews, and the creation of a traveling equity team that will fly monthly to observe crew behavior firsthand. Miles leaned forward in his seat. That sounds like more than damage control. Julian nodded. It's healing, but healing doesn't come from silence. It comes from structure. Caleb clapped slowly, then stood. I've been covering transportation for 6 years. I've never heard a CEO speak like this, Grace added gently. That's because most don't come into the cabin when there's fire. They stay in the tower and pretend it's smoke. Julian turned back to the phone in his hand. Evelyn, confirm initial resources for Pinnacle Unity? Her voice was immediate. Confirmed. 6-month launch budget. $4 million, not including the Pinnacle Sky Trust. Announcement ready for press distribution. Nia looked up from her seat, her voice still tender but stronger now. Are you doing all this because of what happened today? Julian looked at her and replied, No, I'm doing this because what happened today was already happening. I just stepped into it. For a moment, that statement hung like a quiet bell. Then, near the cockpit, the dismissed crew, Margaret, Richard, Chloe, and Samuel, stood together in an uneasy cluster. Their faces no longer wore defiance. They looked stranded. Richard broke the silence. Mr. Harris. Julian turned to him. Richard swallowed. There's more. Caleb's brows narrowed. More. Richard nodded. Last month, I was part of an internal thread among crew members who were uncomfortable with the equity changes your team had begun discussing. The new scholarship fund, the promotion of underrepresented staff. There was pushback. Julian tilted his head, expression unreadable. Go on. Richard hesitated, then confessed. There was a plan, an idea. To leak documents, to circulate rumors that you were inflating your philanthropic numbers, to undermine the Pinnacle Sky Trust before it could gain traction, I didn't start it, but I didn't stop it. A sharp hush fell over the room. Even passengers who hadn't spoken until now turned to listen. Grace asked gently, "Why?" Richard didn't lift his eyes. "Because I was afraid that change would mean I no longer mattered." Silence again. Then Julian said slowly, "You didn't fear irrelevance. You feared equality, and you mistook discomfort for erasure." Richard nodded faintly. "I know," Chloe added, her voice tight. "I saw the messages. I ignored them. That's on me." Samuel shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Evelyn's voice returned, now colder. "We've just received confirmation of the thread. Sir, internal systems logged 3 access points tied to flight operations staff. Do you wish to proceed with disciplinary review?" Julian didn't respond right away. Then he looked at Richard and said simply, "The price of sabotage isn't just termination, it's trust. And you've lost both." Richard stepped back in silence. Miles leaned over to Caleb. "This isn't just a firing. This is a reckoning." Julian nodded. "Pinnacle Air Lux will undergo a full audit. Not just financial, cultural, historical. Every dismissed complaint will be reviewed, every crew member retrained. And from this cabin forward, no one will be denied their seat because of who they are," Grace added quietly. "That's what justice sounds like when it takes flight." Caleb nodded. "And when it lands, it leaves something better behind." Julian turned once more toward the passengers. "We're not just repairing a plane today. We're repairing a promise." And for the first time since the boarding door had closed, the entire aircraft felt like it belonged to everyone inside. The aircraft remained grounded, but the energy within the cabin soared higher than any altitude chart could measure. With the crew dismissed and the new campaign launched, Julian stood still in the center aisle as Evelyn's voice came through once more. "Sir, the FAA has acknowledged receipt of the internal complaint archive. A full inquiry into Captain Vaughn's record has been initiated. Richard, Chloe, and Samuel will be suspended from all flight operations pending a hearing. And per your directive, Frederick Wells has been formally banned." The cabin remained quiet, absorbing the weight of what had just occurred, but the silence was no longer one of fear. It was reverent. Across from Julian, Caleb Grant stood with his pen down, eyes lifted. "This isn't just a story," he said softly. "It's a turning point, and we're living inside it." Julian nodded. "Sometimes reform doesn't begin in boardrooms or courtrooms. Sometimes it starts in aisles like this, with people watching closely and speaking when it counts." Miles Turner, still standing, added, "You turned this whole plane into a courtroom, but no one shouted. You let truth do the speaking." Julian smiled faintly. "Justice doesn't always need volume, just clarity." Evelyn continued. "Sir, news of the Pinnacle Sky Trust is spreading. We've received early commitments from donors matching your contribution. Projected total in the next quarter is already above 22 million. A ripple of astonishment moved through the passengers. Grace stepped forward, calm but purposeful. "Julian, with all due respect, this isn't just company policy anymore. It's a new standard for the industry." Julian turned to her. "And that's exactly what it's meant to be." He walked over to Nia, still seated but no longer shaken. "Ms. Thompson," he said gently, "I'd like to offer you a complimentary charter anywhere in the world. No strings attached. Just as a human being who should have never been doubted." Nia looked up, tears forming. "You didn't just give me a seat. You gave me back my dignity." Julian nodded. "Then that flight belongs to both of us." At that moment, a new voice broke through the cabin. It was deep, weathered. From the last row, an older white man slowly rose. He wore a blue blazer and a captain's pin faded with time. "Mr. Harris," he said with some effort, "may I speak?" Julian turned, surprised. "Of course." The man took a breath. "My name is Russell Denton. I flew for 30 years in private aviation. Retired now. But I know Margaret Vaughn well. I trained her, recommended her, even shielded her when complaints first surfaced 15 years ago." The room stiffened. He continued, voice trembling. "I protected her out of loyalty, out of pride, but I was wrong. I enabled that bias by staying silent. And I want to say, I'm sorry. Not just to you, but to every passenger who flew beneath standards I failed to challenge." Julian walked slowly to him, extending his hand. "Captain Denton, truth, especially late truth, is still truth, and courage doesn't expire with age." The man shook his hand. "This is the aviation I hoped would exist someday. I'm glad I lived to see it." Julian returned to the aisle, then looked around one last time. What happened here today doesn't get buried. It becomes our foundation. The crew didn't fail because they were undertrained. They failed because the culture allowed them to. That ends now. Evelyn's voice came through for the final time. "All updates logged. FAA reviews active. News outlets requesting interviews. But more importantly, sir, the cabin is quiet, and the passengers believe again." Julian nodded. "Then my job here is done." A quiet moment passed, and then the door at the front of the aircraft finally opened. Sunlight spilled into the cabin, a quiet symbol that the flight, though delayed, was finally ready to begin. But no one moved, because something larger had already taken off. A new standard, a new chapter. 1 year later, Pinnacle Air Lux would report a 98% satisfaction rating across all flights, not just for service, but for fairness. The Pinnacle Sky Trust would fund scholarships for 127 new aviators, most of them women and people of color. And the Pinnacle Unity campaign would be studied by other private charter companies across the world. But those were just numbers. The real legacy lived in the memory of one Saturday morning, at a private terminal in Chicago, when a quiet man stood in a cabin full of doubt and changed the altitude of what dignity could mean. And to everyone who sat silently that day and then chose to stand, Julian left them with one final truth. Justice doesn't fly itself. We are the ones who must carry it forward. If this story touches you, please share. Don't let silence continue to fly along the journey. Let justice always have its own seat on every journey.